Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. My name is Mica, and today I'm going to do a testimony. It's a bit difficult because I've never really given this testimony before. There's a lot tied into it. There's a lot of mental health, psychosis, and generally finding and accepting God, and how I came to the place of, what can I say? I don't know. This is very it's like borderline difficult to share this, so I'm just gonna get into it, because if I ramble too much, I'll literally ramble so that I can avoid giving this testimony. A testimony has 3 parts, and so before psychosis, and afterwards. I've been struggling to think of where I can start, to be honest. So I think I should start with where I was in God before I found Him. And so I guess it starts with, let's say A level. So in A level I studied philosophy and psychology, and so as part of philosophy I had to do a lot of philosophy of religion classes. And for me, that kind of strengthened my bias away from Abrahamic conceptions of God. Not so much conceptions of God themselves, not so much the idea of God, but the idea of an Abrahamic God. So we're presented with all these kind of problems, like how can a God be all-knowing and all-powerful but allow certain things, the problem of evil, the kind of paradoxes that you have, like, can God make a stone that is so heavy that He can't lift? Because if He can, then it means He can't do something both ways. So we were presented with stuff like that, and that just didn't make any sense to me, and I'd write all these long essays about how, God was just a human construct, just, a psychological way of coping with the world, I guess. Yeah, I feel like I was more of a pantheist at that stage. So the idea that, God is in nature, God is nature, God is everything, but He's not intentional. That's the specific difference, I guess, that God is not an intentional being or force in your life. So that's the kind of view that I held, and I went through these phases of, being a Buddhist, flirting with Hinduism, and all of these different things. I still quite love Hinduism, I must say, but yeah, I've kind of I have moved away from that now, but that's kind of where I was at beforehand. So fast forward now into uni, and I'm barely even thinking about these kind of spiritual things. I feel like I was quite set on a Buddhist path at one stage, but then I kind of struggled with the concept of compassion and how to be compassionate in political situations, and I kind of hadn't developed a kind of mindset where I could understand how the two could go together. But that's what kind of drew me away from Buddhism initially. So now I'm at uni, and I stopped caring about this kind of stuff. I stopped thinking about this kind of stuff. And what I did instead was take a lot of drugs. So I started smoking a lot of weed, taking, just a lot of recreational stuff. The university club scene, everyone's on Mandy, everyone's on speed, whatever it is. Like, that's kind of what I was drawn into throughout, I'd say most of second year uni. That's the kind of scene I was in. So I wasn't really focused on, kind of intellectual or spiritual pursuits in that sense. I wasn't really bothered about religion either. Yeah, I had this like really religious Christian best friend, and we used to get into arguments all the time about, just the ridiculousness of the idea of the biblical God. It was just so absurd to me. And we would just argue for hours and hours and hours, and kind of like that's where I was at. I was just kind of like, I'm done with this. This is not relevant to my life. I don't need this at all. Like, it makes no sense. Like, I don't understand how anyone with any, a sense of logic or intelligence could believe in God, I guess. That was literally my position. I'm in second year, I'm doing all these crazy things, going out, doing like all this debauchery and just acting wild. And I guess that's kind of also when my mental health started to take a turn for the worse. So I was having a lot of depressive episodes in that time, but they were kind of secret, you know, like I'd break down in my room secretly and cry and then, you know, wipe my eyes and then get up and go. Or I'd be at work, I used to work at a bar, and then there'll be times that I just go into the bathroom and just cry and then just be like, okay, gotta get my game face back on, you know, gotta go back to work, like no one can ever know this happened. And it was just kind of getting to a point where it was just really frequent, and I was just feeling like very worthless and very like I had nothing to offer, like my life was worth nothing, and I had internalized like a lot of self-hatred, and that was really coming out at that time. And yeah, I guess it was also tied into the fact that I was going to be graduating soon, so this was kind of like from second year into third year, and I also had gone away for study abroad and I'd come back. So imagine all of these things just tying together. So I was kind of, you know, homesick from my study, like, well, not homesick, but like I missed my study abroad friends, you know, that environment, and then I came back to England and it was like, you know, I'm back in a situation where I have to deal with the realities of life now. You know, I'm about to go into the world, I'm about to graduate, I hate myself, I hate, you know, everything, and it's just, it was all just getting a bit much. So I decided that I was going to do counseling. Oh yeah, I didn't tell you guys that I was actually studying philosophy and psychology at the time, but I wasn't taking any like religion classes or anything, just like concepts like stuff. I actually took a class in language and reality, which is quite interesting now that I think about it. Yeah, I'll talk about some of those concepts at some point because that's quite interesting. But yeah, I had started going to counseling. So I went to this counselor and I told her, you know, I have all these issues, I hate myself, and I'm starting to have like suicidal thoughts. Like that's what kind of prompted me to go and seek help, because I knew it was kind of getting to a stage where it was like, okay, this is like semi-dangerous now. Like, you know, I studied psychology, I kind of know where this road goes. So I had gone to seek help in that sense. And that experience brought a lot of stuff to the surface. I can't say that I found it entirely beneficial, but I can't say that it wasn't. It just brought a lot to the surface. And I don't know whether that was like, what can I say? If that was part of the, you know, coal in the fire for what was about to happen. I don't know if that's the right analogy, but you kind of get what I'm saying. I don't know if that kind of led the way for the experience that was to come. And in counseling, we talked about like past emotional abuse, past physical abuse, study abroad, relationships, race problems, like all of these things that were all just kind of floating in my head, all at once. And I was also smoking a lot of weed at this time. And you know, with weed, it's one of those things where if you're susceptible to certain mental states, right? If you keep getting high, let's say, if you keep getting high but you know that you're like chronically sad, then as much as you think, you know, it would help that sadness go away, what it will actually do is deepen those feelings and it will accelerate those thoughts. And so you need to be careful. Like, it doesn't have the same effect on everyone. Of course, I used to smoke with a lot of people who still smoke every day who were fine, but it's like if you are already susceptible to certain things, if your mind is already inclined in a certain way, if you start adding these, you know, psychoactive substances, it's gonna go down a certain road, and you should avoid that, because I've seen it happen to many others, not just me. Although I don't think what was to come was entirely drug induced, but it definitely facilitated it. Let's say. I just want to put that out there, guys, because I know a lot of us like to get high, you know. I know it, but you gotta stop. Okay, so that's kind of the before psychosis. So then I came to the psychotic experience, which is very difficult to talk about because it's not, in my head, it's not linear. It's very, you know, all over the place. And so I'll try to describe it as best I can. So I don't even know, I guess just at one point I was just having this experience. So in the big, like, I kind of remember it in like a few stages. So it was kind of like, in the beginning it was euphoric, and then it got scary, and then I was in the hospital, right? So in the euphoric stage, it was what I would have described it as at the time was that that's what it felt like I thought enlightenment was. So in my head it was kind of like this literally undescribable kind of joy and peace, and just, but it was very overwhelming. Like, it was just, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, it wasn't scary at all, but it also wasn't, like, I wasn't high. Like, I know the difference between being on drugs and not being on drugs, and the kind of joy that I had in the time was nothing that I'd ever gotten from any combination of substances. And that for me was like, wow, that's when I really thought like, oh my gosh, yeah, like some of this like spiritual happiness, this kind of stuff is kind of real. So I was just kind of exploring that, but it was really like, it is weird to describe, because I remember one time I was at work and I was like super happy, and then literally one of the girls that I used to work with, she used to have like a lot of anger problems, and in this time, you know, she would always watch me, and I'd always just smile at her, and then she'd be like, can you please teach me how to be this happy? And I'd just be like, I don't know how you get here. I just know that it takes a lot of work, because you need to like keep in mind that before this I had a Buddhist framework in my head. So I had all these concepts of like, you know, non-attachment and being content just with your own being, just in that. So I was thinking that I had reached that point, and it's not that I hadn't, but it was kind of like, that's where I was at in that time, and I was just so happy, and I was just sharing it with everyone. And in the beginning, you know, everyone else was happy too, and it was like, because I was so happy, they also, you know, wanted that as well. So it was kind of like good in that sense. And I remember I was at work one time and I literally cried, because I know that there are other people who will not ever be that happy, and that's just, I don't know, it's a weird experience, but at the time, yeah, it was just what it was. I don't know. And I guess this is a time where it's a bit difficult to describe, you know. This is a time where I was so happy. So remember I said that I thought it was what enlightenment felt like. And to me, people who are pillars of enlightenment are Jesus and the Buddha. So the thing is, what I ended up telling people was that I felt like Jesus, right? But that doesn't mean that I thought I was him. What I was trying to convey was that I was having an experience that I thought, you know, Jesus might have had, like in his relationship to God. And so at this time, I am so happy. I'm just over it. I'm there like, yo guys, I feel like this, you know, like this is amazing. And I remember like I called up my friend who was the Christian that I used to argue with, and I was saying to him, like, I was literally crying. I was like, oh my gosh, like now I understand everything. And then he was just like, what? So I was there trying to convey this happiness to him, but he doesn't understand because we're not in the same space at all, and apparently I'm just rambling and just talking a lot of nonsense. But for me it's like, how do I describe something that's indescribable? Do you see what, like, it wasn't possible. So for him, I'm usually like, you know, the cool, collected, rational person. So for me to call him and be crying and saying like a lot of stuff that is that he couldn't understand was like a real concern. And I feel like this was with a lot of people. And so at this point now, people are getting concerned, and this is where, so remember I said the psychosis as the good and the bad and the what did I say? The hospital. So this is when the bad section started. And the way I describe this to people is, so when you take acid, right, you may not know, but when you take acid, you're supposed to do it in a place where you feel comfortable, where you're surrounded with people that make you feel comfortable, where you feel safe, because otherwise you will have what they describe as a bad trip, right? If you start to feel scared, that will manifest in your trip. So you will start seeing some scary stuff. You'll start thinking a lot of scary things because at this point you don't feel safe, you're anxious. So now that's like the same with getting high as well. So now imagine I'm kind of in a similar mental state, right? And now I'm like deliriously happy, and now it's like people around you are starting to tell you something's wrong, but you don't feel like there's something wrong. So then it's like you start to feed off that negative energy, and that's when you start to feel like, I don't know, that opens up the doors for a lot of negativity. I want to say demons. That's literally what it opens up the doors for. So that's when it got scary. That's when I started to get scared, and that's, I think, when it started to get kind of more out of control. Like as I said, I don't really know how it was linearly, but this is the kind of way that I remember it, in the most linear fashion that I can come up with. So now I'm kind of in a place where I'm kind of defensive, I'm kind of antagonistic as well. So I don't know, it's really difficult to describe, but I think that's when I started to lose more control of it, because then I started to think, that people around me were possessed, and that people were trying to, what can I say? That they were out to get me, do you know what I mean? I felt like I was being hunted, let's say. Yeah, so that's, I guess, when it started to get a bit out of hand. And I remember specifically at one point, I remember telling someone something like I was ready to die or something like that. And it's not like I actually wanted to die. It was like, in my head, the way my thoughts were set up, it was like I had to be willing to prove that I would be willing to die without actually dying. So in my head, it was like, okay, how can I do that? Okay, I can do that by sacrificing my brain. So I can do that by not eating and not sleeping and all these things that are like needed for good health. So I wasn't doing these things, and I wasn't, like, first I just wasn't doing them, and then as I realized I wasn't doing them, I kept not doing them because I knew that not doing them would lead me on to some kind of breakthrough. That's why I was having, like, my mind was in just like a crazy place. I was having all these ideas, all these thoughts, I was making all these discoveries, but at the same time I was being like I felt like people around me were possessed, so I felt like I was being spiritually attacked and all this stuff, and it was just a bit overwhelming. So yes, I don't really remember much of that, but that's the general idea. So after that, now basically for me it was like, at one minute I was here and the next minute I was in a hospital, right? But I didn't know that I was in a hospital because I was so deluded. And I feel like this is when my experience became transformative.